I always believed the deepest betrayals came from strangers, not from the child you raised with your own hands. Yet the moment I woke up from anesthesia and saw the strange clipboard at the foot of my hospital bed, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. An unfamiliar nurse called me a new, long-term resident, and for a few terrifying seconds, I thought she had mixed me up with someone else. But then I realized it wasn't a mistake at all. Someone had put my name on those papers. Someone had requested I be transferred to a nursing facility before I was even fully awake. And that someone was my own daughter. At first, I thought I was imagining things. My mind was foggy from medication. My hands were weak. But the truth didn't wait. It only grew sharper with every passing hour. While I lay in a hospital bed, barely able to move, my daughter was already making decisions about my life, my home, and everything I had spent decades building. She believed I was too weak to stop her. She believed the surgery would take the fight out of me. And worst of all, she believed no one would notice what she was doing until it was too late. I didn't know it yet, but that surgery didn't just revive my body. It peeled away the last illusions I had about the child I trusted more than anyone. What she planned in those days, what she did when she thought I might not wake up, changed everything I knew about family, loyalty, and survival. By the time I pieced it all together, my house was already listed for sale. When I first opened my eyes after the surgery, the world felt strangely distant, as if I had been dropped into a room I recognized but could no longer command. The ceiling lights glowed too brightly. My throat was dry, and my limbs felt heavy, like they belonged to someone else. I remember trying to move my hand, and even that simple effort felt like swimming through thick mud. I told myself it was normal. I had prepared for this surgery for months, read every pamphlet, listened to every warning the doctors gave. Weakness was expected. Confusion was expected. What I did not expect was the uneasy feeling that something had shifted around me while I slept. It was subtle at first. A new binder at the foot of the bed, a different color wristband on my arm, a social worker's business card left on the table, even though I hadn't met one. Nurses speaking to me in a tone normally reserved for people who needed long-term care. Each detail felt harmless on its own, yet together they formed a fog of unease I couldn't wave away. I kept trying to piece together what had happened while I was unconscious. I remembered signing the pre-surgery documents, remembered the anesthesiologist's voice fading away, remembered my daughter squeezing my hand and promising she would handle everything. Those were the last images before darkness. But when I woke, she wasn't there. She wasn't there the next hour either, or the next. And that absence weighed on me far more heavily than the pain from the incision. My daughter had always been present for big moments in my life, even when she was frustrated with me, even when we disagreed. She was the organized one, the one who took control, the one I trusted to handle things, as she always said. So her absence now felt unsettling in a way I didn't want to admit. As the fog in my head slowly cleared, I noticed how often the nurses glanced at that binder near my bed. They flipped through pages I couldn't see, whispered to each other, and nodded toward my chart with a kind of finality that tightened something in my chest. One nurse brought medication and addressed me as if I had already been transferred to another type of care. She mentioned an arrival date for a facility I had never heard of. She pressed a copy of a care plan into the front pocket of the binder, one I had no memory of approving. I wanted to sit up, demand answers, insist there had been a mistake. But my body was still too weak, and my words felt like they were trapped behind layers of exhaustion. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of decisions I hadn't been part of, Every time someone walked into the room, my heartbeat sped up, hoping it would be my daughter. I needed to see her face, needed to hear her calm voice explaining everything. But hours passed. The sky outside the window shifted from morning light to late afternoon shadow. The hospital hallway grew quieter. The staff changed shifts. And still, she didn't come. It wasn't until a hospital administrator visited that the first clear piece of the puzzle fell into place. She greeted me with a sympathetic smile and spoke as if everything had already been arranged, as if I had agreed to every step. She referenced documents I had never seen, decisions I had never discussed, signatures I had never given. And every time I tried to ask why, she responded gently, as though I were confused or fragile, reassuring me that my daughter had handled everything. My daughter. The words hit me like a cold splash of water. While I lay unconscious, unable to defend myself, she had made choices that reshaped my entire future. Somewhere in this hospital, without my knowledge, she had decided where I would live, what would happen to my home, and what my life would look like from this moment forward. I could feel it. Something wasn't right. Something had been set in motion without me. And as the administrator closed the binder and thanked me for cooperating so smoothly, a deep, hollow fear settled inside my chest. A fear that nothing about my life was actually in my control anymore. That first night in the hospital, I barely slept. My mind was foggy, but my instincts were sharper than ever. Something inside me kept whispering that I had to stay alert, that I couldn't just lie there and trust the process the way I always had. I felt like a passenger in my own life. Someone else was steering. Someone else was signing. Someone else was deciding. By morning, I began noticing patterns. Every new staff member who entered my room addressed me with the same soft tone people use when speaking to someone who has already been placed somewhere. They mentioned upcoming evaluations, transportation arrangements, follow-up assignments, none of which I remembered approving, discussing, or even hearing about. They all kept referencing my daughter's decisions. My daughter had always been assertive. She liked order, structure, and predictability. She had stepped into a parental role early in her life because I raised her alone, and she often felt responsible for me more than she needed to. But she had never been unkind, never manipulative, never controlling in a way that made me feel trapped. So I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she misunderstood something. Maybe she panicked. Maybe she overreacted out of concern. I clung to these possibilities because the alternative felt too painful to consider. The second morning, things escalated. A hospital social worker entered my room with a stack of documents. She seemed surprised by how alert I was. She explained that she just needed to confirm placement details and finalize the transition timeline. She kept referencing a facility across town, a place I had never visited, never researched, never discussed with anyone. I asked her what she meant by placement, and she explained my so-called agreement. She said I had chosen temporary long-term care after surgery. She said I had authorized my daughter to manage my home during recovery. She said I had signed off on a timeline. I hadn't done any of that. When she realized how confused I was, she softened. But instead of asking whether a mistake had been made, she assumed I had simply forgotten the conversations. She reassured me she would review the instructions with me again, as if repetition would make the lies true. What frightened me most wasn't the paperwork. It was the confidence with which she spoke, the calm certainty that everything was already arranged. Someone had prepared this. Someone had walked in here with a plan. Someone had taken advantage of my vulnerability, and that someone had my last name. Late that afternoon, I finally got a short, emotionless text from my daughter. She apologized for not coming sooner, said she was handling things, and promised to visit when things settled. There was no warmth in it, no concern for how I felt, just a vague reassurance that everything was under control, under her control, not mine. The text eased nothing. It only deepened the dread in my stomach. By the third day, the social worker returned with an updated file. She said everything was moving forward smoothly. She said the nursing home had already prepared a room. She said my house paperwork was in progress. She said friends of my daughter had already toured the property. Friends, touring, my house. While I lay in a hospital bed, barely able to stand, I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands trembled against the blanket. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. Only one explanation made sense now. My daughter wasn't planning to care for me. She was planning to remove me. She wanted me in a facility. She wanted my house empty. She wanted my keys, my deed, my life taken out of my hands. And she had started the moment they wheeled me into surgery. That realization didn't just hurt. It broke something inside me. Something I didn't know could break at my age. I wasn't fighting for recovery anymore. I was fighting not to disappear into a life someone else had chosen for me. The morning of the third day felt different. The hospital room was quiet, too quiet, as if everyone had stepped back to watch what would happen next. By then, I could sit up on my own. My mind was still cloudy, but clear enough to start connecting pieces. The staff thought I was compliant. My daughter thought I was helpless. Everyone assumed I was too weak to question anything. They were all wrong. As the nurse changed the sheets, I noticed a folder sticking out from the bottom drawer of the bedside cabinet. It wasn't hospital issued. It was too neat, too organized, filled with printed papers separated by color-coded tabs. I knew that system. I had seen it on my daughter's desk countless times. She lived by binders, labels, and structured planning. She had brought this. She had set it up. She had prepared more than anyone realized. Inside the folder, I found copies of forms with my name already typed in, admissions, evaluations, preliminary housing assessments, asset summaries, and a checklist for transition of property access. None were signed, but the spaces were marked with sticky notes, as if someone had intended to guide me through them when I was too groggy to object. The dates on the printed documents told the real story. They weren't prepared after my surgery. They were dated 2 weeks before it. 2 weeks. My daughter hadn't panicked. She hadn't acted impulsively. She had planned every step long before I ever took off my coat in the hospital waiting room. She expected me to be too medicated to notice, too weak to protest, too dependent to resist. She had counted on the anesthesia, on my disorientation, on my trust in her. And she had been right. For 2 days. But not anymore. My heart pounded against my ribs as I flipped through the papers. Each document carried the shape of her handwriting. Reminders, highlighted sections, instructions to herself. She wasn't just organizing finances or preparing for emergencies. She was arranging my life like a piece of furniture she intended to move out of the way. When the social worker returned for her afternoon check, she brought a cheerful tone and a clipboard. She didn't seem to notice that my posture had changed, that my breathing had grown slow and controlled, that my eyes tracked every movement. She started updating me on relocation logistics, detailing things I supposedly approved. She mentioned an estimated transfer date. She described the facility. She talked about my house as if it were a property in escrow. Her voice softened when she reached the subject of family involvement, explaining that my daughter had been incredibly helpful and detail-oriented. She described her as dedicated, organized, committed to ensuring everything went smoothly, dedicated, organized, committed. 3 words that once upon a time made me proud. Now they felt like a knife slipping quietly under my ribs. Later that evening, a real estate agent left a voicemail on my home phone, a recording that synced automatically to my email. I opened it on my hospital tablet. His calm voice explained that he was finalizing next steps and needed my daughter's signature. He thanked us for trusting him with the listing. The listing. They were already preparing to sell my home, a home I had lived in for more than 40 years, a home I built alone after my husband passed, a home filled with every photo, every memory, every piece of my life. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady my breath. The IV line tugged slightly as I moved, grounding me back in the hospital reality. The machine beside me beeped softly, and in that moment, the truth settled so deeply into my bones that I could feel it pulsing with every heartbeat. My daughter didn't expect me to come home. Not to my house, not to my life, not to myself. She had bet everything on my silence, on my weakness, on my inability to fight back. But the thing she had forgotten, the thing she had underestimated, was that mothers don't lose their strength simply because their bodies grow tired. My recovery had just turned into a battle, not for my health, but for my freedom. By the 4th day, my strength began to return, not just in my body, but in my mind. The fog was lifting, and with every hour of clarity, the truth sharpened into something undeniable. I could see the timeline now. I could see the intentions. I could see the preparation behind each carefully placed piece of paperwork. My daughter had built a future for me that didn't include me at all. But plans made in the dark begin to crumble the moment the light touches them. That morning, a new nurse came in, someone who clearly hadn't been briefed on the quiet narrative surrounding me. She treated me as a recovering patient, not a relocation case. She handed me my chart with a casualness that suggested she didn't consider it confidential in any special way. For the first time, I saw everything laid out. There were notes from the social worker about patient cooperation, evaluations scheduled without my consent, and a transfer request written in language that made it sound like I was incapable of making decisions. My daughter had signed on my behalf for almost all of it, claiming I had pre-approved everything. Her signature sat beside my printed name like a verdict. The nurse, unaware of the weight of what she handed me, simply smiled and asked if I needed anything. When she left, I stared at the chart for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. There was a strange calm inside me, the kind that settles when a mother finally understands what she's up against. Later that afternoon, the hospital administrator returned with more documents, assuming I was ready to finalize things. She explained in a routine tone that my placement date had been accepted by the facility. She mentioned that my daughter had already visited the place, toured the rooms, and approved everything on my behalf. They spoke about me with the certainty of people who believed I was too old and too tired to resist. But they didn't expect me to ask questions. They didn't expect me to be aware. They certainly didn't expect me to connect the timeline. When I pressed for details, the administrator hesitated. It was the first crack I had seen in anyone involved. She flipped through the forms, rechecking signatures, highlighting inconsistencies she clearly hadn't noticed before. Her brows furrowed. Her tone changed. She excused herself and said she needed to review the file again. That moment, that pause, told me everything. Her plan wasn't airtight. Her documentation wasn't flawless. Her story had weak seams waiting to split. By evening, another unexpected blessing arrived. One of the nurses from the night shift, an older woman with kind eyes, entered the room with a gentle energy I hadn't felt in days. She took my vitals, checked my incision, and then quietly murmured that I seemed far more alert than she had been told. She said she hadn't expected me to be so independent already. She didn't elaborate, but something in her tone hinted that she had her own doubts about the situation surrounding me. When she left, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the surgery. Momentum. A slow but steady shift in my favor. The next morning delivered the biggest shift of all. I finally saw my daughter. Not in person, but through a glitch she hadn't anticipated. While the hospital tablet synced my voicemail transcriptions, it also pulled in a text thread from my home phone, a conversation between my daughter and someone labeled buyer. They were discussing timelines, deadlines, a move-out date, and the possibility that things might be delayed if she wakes up too soon. If she wakes up too soon. I stared at the words until they blurred. Everything she had done suddenly made horrifying sense. She hadn't counted on my full recovery. She hadn't counted on me waking up quickly. She hadn't counted on me fighting back. Her entire plan relied on my helplessness. She needed me confused for long enough to move me into a facility and remove me from my home. Once I was placed there, everything else would fall into her hands. My keys, my deed, my mail, my life. But she didn't expect the plan to unravel this early, and she certainly didn't expect the person she counted out, her own mother, to rise faster than her calculations allowed. For the first time since the surgery, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. And beneath that anger was something even stronger: determination. I wasn't going to let her bury me in paperwork or hide me behind the walls of a facility. Not while I was alive. Not while I still had a voice. Not while my heart still beat strong. One thing became clear that day. I needed to act before she arrived at the hospital again. Because next time she walked into this room, she would expect to finalize everything. But I was no longer the woman she planned for. On the morning of the 5th day, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fear that had hovered over me since the surgery had transformed into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't drifting through the fog anymore. I was awake. I was alert. And I knew exactly what I had to do. My daughter thought she had the advantage because she moved first. But she forgot something important. I had lived a long life, and I knew how people looked when they were hiding something. I knew the tone of guilt. I recognized the subtle arrogance in someone who felt entirely sure of their control. She thought signing papers behind my back made her powerful. But the moment I sat up in that bed with a clear mind, her advantage began to crumble. That morning, I asked to speak to the hospital ombudsman, a request few patients ever make. The nurse looked surprised, but complied. When the ombudsman arrived, she came with a seriousness that told me not many people asked for her unless something had gone very wrong. I explained my situation calmly, focusing on facts, not emotion. I told her about the folder, the timeline, the signatures I never gave, the texts that revealed far more than anyone intended. And for the first time since the surgery, someone truly listened. She asked questions. She took notes. She reviewed the binder, the chart, the signatures, the timelines. I could see her expression shift from professional neutrality to deep concern. She excused herself, promising to return after reviewing the legalities. When she came back, everything changed. She explained that no one was allowed to authorize placement into long-term care without my direct consent, not even family. She said any relocation or sale of my assets required my written approval. She said the hospital would put an immediate hold on all transfer plans. She said they would also report the situation to the appropriate department, given the nature of the documents. With one conversation, my daughter's carefully constructed plan began collapsing like a house built on sand. That afternoon, a meeting was held with hospital administration, the social worker, and the ombudsman. They apologized for proceeding based solely on third-party instruction. They acknowledged that assumptions had been made. They assured me that nothing else would move forward without my direct involvement. For the first time since my surgery, I felt safe. But the real test came that evening. My daughter finally arrived. Her smile was tight, practiced, and her eyes darted to the binder that was no longer at the foot of my bed. She seemed thrown off, as if the script she had memorized no longer matched the scene in front of her. She hovered near the door, observing the new energy in the room. Nurses who no longer followed her lead, administrators who treated me as the decision-maker, and an ombudsman who stayed in the hallway just long enough to be seen. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and she felt it. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need anger. I didn't need accusations. The truth had revealed itself without a single word from me. Her face tightened, and she left quickly, far more quickly than she arrived. I didn't chase her. I didn't call after her. I simply watched her walk away, realizing that I had been holding on to an image of her that no longer existed. When the door closed behind her, the weight that had suffocated me for days lifted. I was free. 2 days later, I was cleared to go home. The ombudsman personally ensured that my discharge was handled correctly. A friend picked me up and brought me back to the one place my daughter had tried to erase me from, my own house. When I stepped inside, the living room greeted me like an old friend. It smelled like lavender and lemon cleaner, exactly the way I left it. My furniture was still in place. My photos still faced the room. My life, though shaken, was still mine. I sank into my favorite chair with a sense of relief so deep it felt like release. I had survived surgery. I had survived manipulation. I had survived my daughter's betrayal. And most importantly, I had survived disappearing. The next week, the realtor called again, asking about the listing. I told him there was no listing. There never would be one. Not without me. I haven't heard from my daughter since. Maybe she's ashamed. Maybe she's angry. Maybe she's waiting for me to reach out. But I'm not ready. Some wounds need time. Some truths need distance. What she tried to do wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A choice to remove me from the life I built. A choice to control what was never hers. A choice to treat me like a burden instead of a mother. If there is a lesson in all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person you trusted to hold your hand while you healed. And sometimes surviving isn't just about the body. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself someone tried to take when you were at your weakest. But I am here. I am alive. I am home. And no one will ever make decisions for me again.